Thank you everybody for coming. We're going to have this as a follow-up to the first panel we had, which was 2 weeks ago on Monday. And that was a talk back for the movie, the documentary Untouchable. And this one is going to be more geared for not just the general public to know more about this issue, but for those that are actually on the registry or have somebody that's in their life that's affected by the registry, or they work in this space, social workers or caseworkers or other terms that are used for people that are helping out individuals that are on the registry. And so hopefully have some resources tonight, some clarification on laws, some things that are coming up. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to try and follow along with those and answer them as they come across. If I miss one, please maybe post it again. In the midst of things, I might not catch everything, but I want to be able to answer some questions for people or have the panel be able to address those. The panel is Adele Nicholas, the Executive Director of Illinois Voices. Thank you very much for joining us. Mark Weinberg is an attorney in Chicago who is very well versed in this. I think almost every time I talk to somebody who has a legal case regarding this area, they either know or are a client of Mark's. So he's very well versed in the topic. Donald Buzanowski, who is a retiree and is also somebody who's on the registry and is a lifetime GPS. And Brenda Jones, who is the Executive Director of NARSOL, which is a National Association for Rational Sexual Offense Laws. So we're going to start out with, I think, the law aspect of it. Makes the best, sense to come to, because that's where most people are having a lot of questions, and it's probably more, pretty popular. So for Adele and Mark, just want to talk about, and I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. How did you get into this work? Let's start with Adele, since that seems to be the leader of the group. You said, Mark.
Yep. Okay, that throws us off a little bit, but go ahead, Adele.
I think we can handle it.
Yeah.
We'll be flexible. Hi, my name is Adele Nicholas. Thanks for that nice introduction. I'm an attorney based in Chicago. Mark and I have been law partners for a long time. We work on these cases together. And I've recently taken over as the executive director of Illinois Voices for Reform, which is our organization here in Illinois that seeks to reform registries, residency restrictions, and other collateral consequences of sex offense convictions. We got into this work about maybe 7 years ago now. I'll let Mark give a little bit more of the background on how we got started doing this.
Okay, well, it was completely by accident. We knew nothing about this area of the law, and a friend of a friend told my friend that Illinois Voices was looking for some lawyers to bring some lawsuits. Well, Adele and I are civil rights lawyers, but we knew nothing about the sex offender area of law. And so we contacted the Illinois Voices, and then for the next 6 months, we had a weekly Zoom with the 4 guys who were Illinois Voices, which is the largest advocacy group in Illinois for reform of the sex offender laws. And we learned about this area. We learned about the perils of residency restrictions and how difficult it is to buy a house. We learned about the perils of setting foot into a park. We were shocked that you couldn't pick up your child from a school. We were shocked that one of the guys couldn't or was at risk of being arrested for teaching chess at a park district location. It just boggled our minds. And over the course of the 6 months, we thought, well, we have to bring some lawsuits against these, what we regarded as unconstitutional restrictions. All of which is to say, like most of you know, that if you are not a victim of these laws, or you don't know somebody who is a victim of these laws, you have no idea how horrible they are, how restrictive they are. And people have to know, because they are outrageous. Anyway, that was 7 years ago. And since then, Adele and I have filed, well, we've basically devoted our legal careers to filing lawsuits challenging a multitude of these various restrictions. And that's how we got into it. I guess I would say it reminds me of a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt. It reminds me of a quote that she said, "The American people aren't stupid, they're ignorant. Explain, explain, explain." And I have this hope that once people do understand how horrible these laws are, they will change their minds about them. And so that's kind of the business we're in now. Oh, Shannon, I think you're muted. Still muted.
Following up on that quote, how do you feel people have been taking that? I mean, how has the reception been in this work you've been doing so deeply, since then?
Well, I mean, there's the personal level and then there's the professional legal level. On a personal level, I mean, my family has come around. That's all I can say, is that I had a sister who I love and adore and is 7 years older than I am. And when I told her that I was going to do this type of work, she said, "Why do you want to do something like that?" Very disparagingly. And then, now over the course of 7 years, she's come to understand why this work is so important and why this population of people, deserves their rights protected, even if they've done things that, people disapprove of. It's not a matter of, defending certain types of actions. It's a matter of trying to allow people to move on with their lives and live productive lives. And our society doesn't do this for that population. And then as far as the courts, well, we're going to talk about some of our lawsuits, but it's been a mixed bag. We've had some successes and we've had some failures. But I do think that judges can be convinced that these laws are wrong-headed and misguided and unconstitutional.
That's a good segue. So where are the laws at right now? Like, you kind of talk is in any path that you want to about what's going on and what has been accomplished in your experience with Adele.
Okay, I'm going to just start one more thing about one of our lawsuits that we're waiting on. It's called our GPS lawsuit, and then Adele's going to talk about more general about our other various lawsuits. So we have a lawsuit right now that is in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the federal court of appeals in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. And we are challenging the scheme in Wisconsin, which requires that anybody who's been convicted of 2 or more counts of a sex offense has to wear a GPS for life. This is a new law based on a new interpretation from 2018 by the then Attorney General of Wisconsin, Brad Schimmel. Before 2018, you had to be convicted of 2 separate instances of a sex offense. But he changed it to mean incident mean count, or count means, or incident actually meant count. So if you were convicted of 2 counts of child pornography, meaning downloaded 2 images of a child, you were then regarded as having committed 2 counts and would be required to wear a GPS for life. We have challenged that law as violating the 4th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The 4th Amendment is the amendment that prohibits unreasonable search and seizures, and we are saying that this is an unreasonable search. And the law is clear that forcing somebody to wear a GPS for life is a search. The question we are presenting to the court is whether it's an unreasonable search. And there's arguments on both sides for, obviously both sides have arguments. We say this is obviously unreasonable. It shows where somebody is 24/7 every day, all, their whole lives. And the other side says, well, that's true. It shows where you are, but it doesn't show what you're doing. And so it's not overly intrusive. At the same time, we say this doesn't prevent any. They say it prevents people from recidivating. And we say there is absolutely no proof it prevents people from recidivating. And there is the question of who carries the burden of proof. Does the government have to show that it prevents recidivating, which they can't do? Or do the plaintiffs have to show that it doesn't prevent recidivating, which is difficult to do? Anyway, these are open questions because the court has not ruled yet on this case. And it's quite striking that they haven't ruled because Adele argued the case at the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, September 18th, 2020, meaning almost a year and a half ago. You can count on one hand over the last 20 years, how many cases have it's taken a year and a half wait for a case to be decided. So something is going on at the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals about this case. The problem is we have no idea whether it's good news or bad news. And for our sanity, we don't even speculate about it. So that's one of our cases, and I'll hand it over, unless there's questions, I'll hand it over to Adele for the other cases.
Well, yeah, I have a couple, because so this topic is really interesting because we have a lot of people that are readers of our newsletter inside who will say, even just recently, we had somebody ask, they heard about this law change that, the Attorney General reinterpreted, and we're trying to tell them it wasn't actually called. It's not the current one, it's the one before. And so I'm always at a loss as to explain the, not necessarily the legality of it, but what is the reasoning? Why would that happen? Is there actually something in the law that keeps, an interpretation open for this? Or did he just kind of go ahead and say, I want this to happen, and I'm going to just, manipulate this law and make this a new, existence?
Okay, so that's a good question. It is definitely a reinterpretation of the law. Adele, do you remember the exact language? Because I think it was two or more incidences.
It's 2 or more separate occasions.
Okay.
What the law says. And then we've got the attorney, any normal person sitting here who knows how to speak English knows what an occasion is and knows what separate is. But when we get into this legal interpretation, the Attorney General has a different understanding of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And so, and you said there's only a few, like on one hand, you can count how many cases have waited this long. And, we always, every issue, we're like, oh, the update is, static. There's nothing has happened yet. We can't give you anything new. And I always feel bad, like, I'm just kicking the can down for them, but really it's just been in the courts for so long. What would be so that happens and it gets ruled, in everyone who's reasonably understanding this area's favor. What happens then? What would be the outcome?
Okay, so that's a good question, because the Seventh Circuit can do a lot of different things when they rule, and including sending it back down to the lower court for reconsideration about reasonableness. That is to say that it's a little bit unclear whether the Seventh Circuit will make a definitive decision about the constitutionality of the scheme that we're challenging, or whether they will just make some more limited determinations and leave that open for a lower court to make a determination. And then again, we'd have to appeal to the Seventh Circuit again. Or if they make a definitive determination saying that this scheme is unconstitutional, it would not surprise me at all if the other side appealed to the United States Supreme Court about this matter.
Yeah. So is there good precedent at all, or is this kind of a wild, wild west because it's such a new thing that hasn't been challenged successfully yet?
Well, there's at least two good cases, but there's state cases that have found that GPS for life is unconstitutional. I think it's one in South Carolina and maybe one in North Carolina are the two good cases, although I may be different states. But in terms of federal jurisdiction, I think that is the Wild West. I think ours is the only case I know of in the federal appellate court right now dealing with the question of GPS for life and its constitutionality.
So would this impact a region, the whole country, or just Wisconsin?
No, it would only impact the Seventh Circuit, which is 3 states, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Illinois. So we live in this system, the federal system, which is broken down into 11 different jurisdictions. And each jurisdiction of the appellate courts controls their own states. But the force of an appellate court jurisdiction does have power in other persuasive power in other courts among the federal system. It's just not a binding precedent.
Okay. Do the other states that are in that jurisdiction also have lifetime GPS?
No. So Illinois does not have lifetime GPS. And as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, Adele, Indiana doesn't have it. And then, and that's a good question, Shannon. I'm not sure what other states in the United States has it.
Oh, okay. But there are other states, or we're not the only state, I imagine, that have the lifetime GPS.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Well, that's it. That's good. I'm interested in that because I thought that there were a variety of them. Like I would have thought Florida, after that movie, had it. You know, they have everything else. It seems like the scorched earth policy. So
Yeah, yeah, no. In this instance, Wisconsin may be the most extreme state in the country.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think this is the only area that we have that moniker when it comes to corrections, unfortunately. So
Unfortunately, yeah, I think you're right.
So what has, I guess, gone good legally in fighting these beyond? You mentioned, I think, 2 cases. Have there been other things, or is that the max of rulings that have come to overturn some of these lifetime GPS and I think housing restrictions and where you can stay certain feet from different areas? I mean, how many victories have there been against these types of rules the past, say, 10 years or so?
So you broke up a little bit, but I'll let Adele address some of the other cases like housing, registration, lifetime versus limited duration. Take it away, Adele.
So in addition to working on this challenge to lifetime GPS monitoring, we've been litigating cases regarding several aspects of housing for the past 7 years, both in Illinois and Wisconsin, and a couple times in Minnesota. Starting with our Wisconsin cases, in 2017, we got an excellent decision from a district judge in the Eastern District of Wisconsin, finding that a municipal residency ordinance enacted by the Village of Pleasant Prairie was unconstitutional because it violated the ex post facto clause and the equal protection clause. And that decision was very important in our fight against these unreasonable laws because it enabled us to bring challenges to many similar laws in other communities in Wisconsin. As I'm sure most of the people on this Zoom know, Wisconsin is a state that does not have a top-down approach to residency restrictions. It allows each municipality to decide how to regulate people who live within their jurisdiction. And this predictably leads to a race to the bottom where each municipality is in competition with its neighbors to enact the most extreme law. So if one municipality enacts a 1,000-foot restriction, its neighbor might enact a 1,500-foot restriction. And this has been a escalating problem for years, where we now have many municipalities in Wisconsin that have very extreme laws that really bear no resemblance to the original idea behind these laws, which is to have people who have been convicted of offenses against minors prohibited from living in very close proximity to places where children might gather. So we started with this Pleasant Prairie case, and we were very pleased with that decision, and it enabled us to bring challenges to many other municipal residency restrictions. Then we had a terrible situation come up in Illinois, where 2 of our clients who were subject to a residency restriction on living within 500 feet of home daycares were both told they had to move out of their homes because someone had obtained a license to operate a home daycare near them, within 500 feet of them. And we sued to invalidate that law here in Illinois. And it was quickly shot down by a conservative district judge and also by the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals when we appealed that decision. And the 7th Circuit did something very troubling, which is it found law couldn't violate the ex post facto clause because it wasn't really retroactive. This is inconsistent with what other courts have said about whether these laws should be seen as retroactive, but it really had the effect of making it harder for us to bring these challenges to municipal residency restrictions. but it's required some creativity, and we're certainly not giving up the fight. And so we currently have 3 cases pending where we're challenging residency restrictions in Wisconsin, enacted by 3 different municipalities. One of them we were working on all day today. I still have it here in front of me, trying to proofread it for filing tonight, but is going up to the 7th Circuit again on this same question of what is retroactivity. And we think that there is some reason for optimism that the 7th Circuit is going to take another look at this and bring its case law in line with how other courts have looked at this question of whether a law is retroactive. A normal person's understanding of retroactivity would be if it applies to someone who was convicted prior to the enactment of the new law, that's retroactive. That's how almost every jurisdiction looks at it. What the 7th Circuit has said in a couple of cases is, well, that law is really prospective rather than retroactive because it's only regulating conduct that occurs after the enactment. So in the Illinois case, for example, they said, this is prospective, even though your clients were convicted of their offenses long before this residency law was enacted. It only regulates future conduct remaining in their own homes after the enactment of this law, which is a troublingly strange interpretation of what constitutes retroactivity. We are cautiously optimistic that we're going to get the 7th Circuit to take another look at that issue in a case we've brought challenging the constitutionality of a residency law enacted by the Village of Heartland, Wisconsin. We also have 2 other cases where we're challenging very extreme municipal ordinances. One in the town of Paris, Wisconsin, that prohibits people who have past convictions from living within 6,500 feet of a variety of protected locations and 6,500 feet of one another. So obviously that puts almost the entire city off limits. And we think it's just very extreme and really untethered from any of the purposes that courts have upheld these types of laws for. The other case is against the village of Muskego, city of Muskego, and Muskego's ordinance prohibits people with past convictions from establishing a residence in Muskego unless they lived in Muskego at the time they committed their offense. And this is really a just, we don't want you here clause, but many municipalities have them. They call them original domicile clauses. So these cases are going on right now. They have uncertain futures, but we are continuing to fight for them. And I would just mention that there is one small sliver of optimism or cause for optimism today, which was that it's not even a decision, it's a statement issued by Justice Sotomayor of the US Supreme Court. She made the very unusual decision to write a rather long statement about a case that the Supreme Court is not going to take. And that's a case arising out of New York, where people with sex offense convictions were being held in prison long after completing their sentences because they couldn't find a place to live that complied with all of the residency laws. And Justice Sotomayor took this opportunity to write a rather lengthy discussion of these laws and all of these studies that have been done about these laws that show that they are not effective. They drive homelessness and social isolation and a host of other bad effects that actually have the opposite effect that communities want to have, which is that people don't commit new crimes. People have law-abiding lives. So it's just an unusual and encouraging development that Justice Sotomayor took this opportunity to really highlight how irrational these laws are. So it gives us some cause for optimism as we continue these fights.
And that's what's interesting, going off of what Mark was saying about the issue of doesn't matter what a person did, when you start to trample on rights, it's a slippery slope. This goes beyond just a matter of rights. It's, pretty well accepted at this point in the social science that there's no evidence. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary, that these are useful, valuable laws, that these things are actually helping anybody, whether it be people who would be victims or people who were, it's not, benefiting anybody. And to kind of go back to the movie, the Untouchable documentary, the main character in the movie, who was the force behind so much happening in Florida to become scorched earth for people who, are on the registry, he was asked at the very end of the movie and said, how many of these laws you have been behind pushing and getting passed would have saved your daughter? And he said, well, pretty much none. And so that's pretty clear to those of us who are, as as Brenda's organization is doing, rationally looking at what's going on here. And so I want to check in with anybody who's viewing and who kind of came in late. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. If I miss it, please, post it again, but we definitely want to try and get questions answered. The other thing that's interesting also is that the sense of ex post facto can be avoided, or at least has been attempted to be avoided, I believe, by calling these not punishments, but isn't it like a civil issue versus a punishment?
Yeah, that's the second step of the analysis. So first you have to decide whether the law is retroactive. And then you have to decide whether it's punitive. And strangely, in our jurisdiction under the Seventh Circuit's current case law, it's very hard to even get to that second question of whether the law is punitive, because it's almost impossible to establish that the law is retroactive. And that's what happened in the case that we're appealing right now. But yes, you make an excellent point, which is that these laws have been studied, and they've been studied by law enforcement, by the United States federal government, the Department of Justice, scholars, social scientists, correctional institutions, and the results are clear. These laws do not work. They do not make anyone safer. So what's really going on? Why are municipalities enacting this? And it's because there are political points to be scored. People don't like this population. People with past convictions are widely feared and largely hated by society, and politicians can score easy points by passing laws that harm and disadvantage this population. And so that's what's really happening here. And of course, that points to these laws being a punishment rather than any kind of legitimate civil regulation.
Yeah. Yeah, I very much appreciate you, Mark, coming on and answering these questions and clarifying some things that I myself still have been unclear on, and I'm sure some of the people watching have been unclear on. So I believe Mark has to go, but if you can stick around, if either of you can, there might be some more questions coming your way, but yeah, greatly appreciate that. I want to go to next my friend Donald Buzanowski.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm going to say good night.
Absolutely, thank you, Mark.
have a good rest of the night. Bye.
So I want to go now to my friend Donald Buzanowski. So as I mentioned earlier, Don is a retiree, and he's currently experiencing a lot of what's been talked about so far. And I was hoping, Don, you could talk about some of your experience with resources, and as is the theme here tonight, of how to not just talk about this, but kind of move forward in a way if you're on the registry, and until things change, how do you get some vouchers for food and housing, and how do you find employment? So you've kind of travailed a lot of those. I have been along the ride with you as much as I can while being incarcerated at times, and having been out now at times. And so if you can talk about some of that, what things you can kind of recommend to people and that are just getting out or trying to find their footing with being on the registry.
Thank you. Much of the stuff I bumped into was really just bumping into, having no idea that something was going to come of it. And in some cases, things were dropped in my lap. From a practical point of view, if you're looking for energy assistance or food share assistance, you need to contact your local the county's Health and Human Services. And for energy assistance, they will send you the paperwork to fill out and apply. If it's for food share, there are cooperatives that deal with specific counties, and they will give you the number to contact the agency that takes care of your particular county. They will send you the paperwork so you can apply. When I applied for food stamps, I got the lowest that was possible. which today is $20 a month. That doesn't sound like a lot, but if your resources are slim, $20 turns out to be $240 a year. That buys a lot of milk. Now, with COVID money, and because of the financial situation going downhill, they've upped that amount to every one of us. I don't know how they figured that out, but all of a sudden I get $20 a month and also $230 a month for food. So, you know, it's worth applying and it's worth going for. When it comes to energy assistance, they pay for heating and electric. And if the heating and electric is part of your rent, you get that money. If you're paying like I do for heating, for electric, they send the electric money directly to Wisconsin Public Service instead of to me, and that shows up in my bill as not having to pay anything this particular month. I think what I got for this last time was like about $250 to help pay for that. Hang on a minute while I go through my paperwork here.
And these are all things that are not unique to, there's something that's available to people that are on, it's not just something like a lot of resources, for example, you'll check out and they might at some point have an issue with you getting the resource because they're on the registry. These are available to anybody that's on the registry.
Yes, they don't ask you questions about the registry. They just, the paperwork you fill out is about how much you're earning. And when it comes to, those two items, the energy and the food share, they also want to know if somebody's helping you financially, other than, like in my case, I have a retirement fund and I have Social Security. But then for years, a friend has been sending me money to help me make it. And they want to know about that kind of income also. But that has not prevented me from getting either of those. When you fill out your your income tax, first off, if you're retired in the state of Wisconsin, you can find an AARP organization that will do your taxes for you free. It's if you're retired. When filling out your taxes, always do the homestead paperwork, because they will, the state will return money to you after you filed. I've been getting money back because of the homestead. I'm not sure, my income is what, well, anybody's income is going to change how much you get back, but you do get back.
In terms of housing, how has your experience been with finding, I guess what advice can you give? Because I know your experience has been up and down. So what advice can you give to somebody in terms of finding housing?
Don't give up. My first 2 years, it was impossible to find a place, because in Green Bay, there is a residency board that you have to go before. And every time I applied, they denied. So I was back living in the facility that's provided for us when you can't find a place to live. I found a place, lived there for a year. And then the politicians in the city got to the owner and he wouldn't renew my lease for the second year. So I was out again. Finally, I found the place I live in. I've been here for over 8 years and it's been good. But the first 2 years were really problematic because I'd find a place, yeah, and I was right up front with that. There's a thing, when you go to find a place, be right up front with the landlord that you're on the registry. Don't try to hide that. He's going to find it anyway. And it makes it easier for them and for you because they can say no when you know it, and you're not playing games and, 2 months down the road, you find out it's a no. You just got to keep plugging because you're going to find a place. It's just that it is difficult. It's not easy, and it can be very discouraging.
Have you found, I know locally we have a support group, Expo R, who I'll talk about in a bit, has created kind of a support group for people that are on the registry. Have you found anything in your area, or do you have any suggestions for someone that might be struggling with all these things and finding, a place to talk about it, or somebody else to be able to, share some resources or just, encouragement?
I think there's a place in there's a program in Oshkosh, but I don't remember that for sure anymore. Maybe it's Appleton. I've been lucky because friends from the past, not every one of them, but important ones, have been there supporting me and helping me along and encouraging me. So I've been lucky with that, with previous friends. But as far as some kind of support group, if there is one, I don't know about it, and I have never been part of one.
Well, hopefully after this, sharing some of the information about Expo R and just the information that Brenda's going to provide, there can be some growth there, different areas, people to start sharing resources and supporting each other more. Because it is such a difficult area to get official resources and organizations to, come in. So the last thing I wanted you to speak about, and if there's anything else you want to mention, please do, but the elder care project that you're working on, you want to talk about that a bit?
Okay, 1 second before then,
Yes.
just a lot of other things to help people financially.
Oh, yes, awesome.
There are resale stores, mostly a lot of them attached to senior facilities, which you can buy things less expensive. There's Goodwill, there's St. Vincent de Paul, and there's other smaller units. So going to some of these, I refer to them as resale stores, can help your budget tremendously. I mean, instead of paying $100 for a set of 4 dishes, you can get a set of 4 dishes for less than 20. Another thing to look for is look for cashback programs in the stores you go to. I buy a lot of my stuff, most of my stuff at Meijer's, and for every $200 I spend, I get $4 coupon on a purchase, total purchase. Fleet Farm, same thing. They pay for, it's a point system, and when you get your points, you get $5. So my approach has always been any little bit helps. Take advantage of it. A friend of mine fell in his apartment. Took him 2 hours to get to his phone to call his sister, who was his power of attorney. She called the rescue squad. They took him to a local hospital. He spent 5 to 6 weeks in the hospital, not because he needed hospital care, but because the social worker from the hospital could not find a assisted living facility that would take someone on the registry. And this kind of dropped this thing in my lap. I mean, I thought, this can't be right. What I found out is the law reads that any facility that gives service or residency to someone on the registry, they will lose their federal funding if they do that. And the place I wanted to go that I was set to fill out the initial paperwork, they told me point blank. I mean, I visit people in their facility all the time because I do facility visiting. They said they would lose their federal funding. It's a big facility and it's a very good facility. So working with Ross, what we're working on right now is we have a group of students in a program at Marquette. At the present time, I'm going to backtrack for a minute. So I got a hold of the social workers at the hospital, and she gave me some names to call. And I find out that there's 21 people in the state of Wisconsin throughout that are in charge of keeping track of registrants, addresses, and phone numbers and keeping them updated. And so when I talked to the local one in my county, she says, Don, all we have is addresses. So we don't know if they're in a nursing home, an assisted living program, or if that's a private home. If it's got an apartment number, it could be either or. So here we go. So there's a group of students who right now are studying the issue of senior citizens and people on the registry. And by the middle of April, they're going to use the registry list. And there's a list of assisted living programs that you can get off the computer. Plus I have from the people in one of the homes that I visit, she gave me the list of over 400 facilities that are in the state of Wisconsin that they can use too. What they're going to do is go through and start matching addresses. And if the registrant is at an address, his address is the same as an assisted living program, bingo, we've got an assisted living we got somebody who is taking care of registrants. The lady I talked to from the 21, she says, we need that kind of list on. She says, we spend enormous amount of time looking for places for registrants to be. My XPO said the same thing to me. We have a DRC up here. They help people find places to live. They said, we need that information. It would save us tons of time. So talked to Ross, did some checking, and starting in a couple of weeks, that class is going to start doing this juggling to figure out. And by the middle of April, we should have a list, large or small, of places where registrants are presently living in an assisted living program. And then those lists are going to be spread out so that people know it. And after that's done, Ross, then we need somebody to maintain that list once it's formulated.
I'll
But
find somebody.
that's an issue for tomorrow.
Yeah, for tomorrow.
The friend that ended up in the hospital so long, he's in an assisted living program. So we know there's one for sure that will take people on the registry. So that's in the works. Hopefully by mid-April, we should have something.
Yeah, it's remarkable because as in the prison system out here, people that are on the registry, which is like the outside version of prison of lifetime DPS, are getting older. That population is getting older and older, and there's more needs in the geriatric realm for on both sides. And so this is going to become an increasing issue. And why does it take you and I, you stumbling into this, and then just knowing me and knowing that I had a fair amount of connections here to hopefully get something done with it? And it's just remarkable that that's the way that has to get done with all these different agencies that are like, oh, thank you, individual person that's not getting paid for this, for taking care of something that our organizations massively need, so but that is par for the course when it comes to the system. So, and I also wanted to state, that Donna's calling me Ross because anyone who knows me in prison always called me Ross. That was just the
Oh.
prison thing. It's yeah. No, you're fine. I don't care. But just clarifying for people would be like, who is Ross suddenly? So my name just suddenly changed. Somebody asked in the chat, or maybe it was a question and answer area. This would be my last question for you. What are the 3 things that you would say are the most difficult for an individual coming out, let's say specifically for the registry? I personally think housing is the worst, but what would you say the top 3 issues?
Well, I know housing to be the worst. Oh, I forgot one big money. My landlord calls me in December
Oh, right.
and tells me, Don, your rent is going to go up from $740 a month to $920 a month. And I'm going, gee, I thought the next time I was going to move would be to an assisted living program, but it looks like I'm going to have to find a new apartment. Calls me back the day later and he says, here's the name of a number of a lady I know in Oconto. Call her. So I did. She sent me 5 pages of paperwork. I filled them out, sent them back to her. She says, you've been accepted. Now here's 9 more pages. So I filled them out. Some of them had to be filled out by my landlord. He was more than happy to come and fill them out. And then I had him take them to NewCap. I think every area in the state of Wisconsin has a NewCap. And they took the paperwork, processed it, and they are paying my $920 a month rent. How long that's going to last is anybody's good guess. Every 3 months I have to, they call reapply. It's just a single piece of paperwork. So it gives me a chance to save up some money because that's not going to last forever. What I understand is a lot of that money is coming from unused COVID money that was sent to the states to help with rent. And so that will run out eventually. But man, that was nice.
Yeah. Instead of getting a rent increase, you got all your rent paid for.
So any rate, so NewCap, I mean, if you've never heard of this, and the figure is you have to be within the bottom 80% of the mean income of the state of Wisconsin. The mean income of the state of Wisconsin is about $50,000. So to apply, you got to be earning under 40,000. So a lot of people who have got not high-paying jobs would be able to apply and get some money. And that's done through NewCap. You can just stop into their offices and explain your situation, and they'll start giving you the paperwork.
And so I'm going to put our organization, our email, and our website in the chat if anybody wants to contact us for more on that. And then when we send out an email after this to the group, everybody that watched with the recording, I'll include some of the stuff that you said so they can have links to organizations and so forth. And somebody asked a question about by assisted living facilities. Do you mean skilled nursing facilities? Does that also count?
Most of the facilities that that I've been bumping into, their initial starting level is assisted living. And some of them only have assisted living, but some of them take you from assisted living to death. And that would cover that whole gamut. Now, if you move, there are facilities where you can move in and live like it was an apartment building. And then when you bump into assisted living needs, then they up you to assisted living, and well, they up your cost too. But what you're really starting at, the starting level basically is assisted living.
Okay.
And most people who have to go to a facility, they fight it until they know they need assisted living. But then that can go all the way to nursing care, that can go to, whatever level to when you die.
All right. Well, I think that you've been very helpful for a lot of people. And so, like I said, it'll make more of this available later, but thank you, especially on short notice. Oh, go
I
ahead.
want to know, no, I want to finish the question you started. What are the three most problems?
Oh, yes.
One is housing. Two is jobs. And the third one is if you can't find a job and you can't find housing. When I first became part of the system out here, I met someone because they would not grant him permission to live in apartment buildings, was in the middle of January, living in his car in a Shopko parking lot because Shopko said he could. He slept in his car, he ate in his car, and it was parked in the Shopko parking lot. That, the word I've had for that is crimes against humanity.
I know somebody else in the chat had mentioned another resource for everybody to consider. You probably have as well at some point is 211. Those are national, so they tend to have a variety. Oh, never heard of 211?
No.
Okay. Yeah, they're just a
You
cover
didn't
resource
tell me
for us.
about that.
Well, you should have subscribed to our newsletter. I don't know. We've talked about it before.
You should have sent it to me.
All right, Fuzz. Yeah, thank you again on short notice, really. I know just like 2 days
Thank
ago I
you.
told you about this. So okay, Brenda, thank you for waiting. No, it's
All right.
playing cleanup hitter. So, okay, how did you get into this work? Because NARSOL, in my opinion, from what I understand, is like the leading organization across the nation in this space. So I'd love to know the story of how that started and you know how you got to where you are right now.
Well, I came into NARSOL. It had already been around a couple of years, and we were not as well organized. But I've been with it since 2010, and it got its start basically as a petition, although we didn't quite call it that online, and have grown obviously quite a bit since then. Gotten more organized. We've got, in fact, Adele's group is one of our state affiliates. So we have affiliates in a lot of different states. I got involved personally at about that time because of a family member who, encountered these laws. And I had decided at that point that, I was worried about him, but I also came to realize just how awful the laws were to so many people. And so I got involved first in my state and then got involved nationally with the second conference that NARSOL ever had. It was called RSOL back then. Been involved with them ever since, working various levels in leadership and at state level.
So there's a new thing. I don't know if it's new. Maybe it hasn't been going around. I just know of it recently. Called fearless groups. And so I find that really to be a unique way of, especially with my guerrilla attempt of trying to solve things that I like to impose, which is not waiting for somebody else, just start doing it and find other people and get it done. In this space, you have such a great need for help, but you have such a small level of empathy and interest from those that have the power to help. And so the only way to help in that sense is to help each other. I think that's always the only way we ever get anywhere is helping each other until other people see that, it can be done as well or that it's a need. And so in this space, I think the fearless groups you all have been starting are a perfect example of that and something I would love to see created in Wisconsin more so.
Yeah, I could tell a little bit about that. It's been around a few years. It's growing organically. We kicked it off. I think the first few groups were not initially called Fearless. They got started in Texas by one of our other affiliate leaders, Mary Sue Molnar, who got some groups going there. And they were doing so well and being so helpful to the folks there that a few other states picked them up. Nebraska picked them up, Oklahoma. The group in Nebraska first started calling itself Fearless. And then it was a couple of years after that, we said, we really need to kind of formalize this and see if we can get groups going everywhere. Fearless groups are they are support groups, but you would probably be more comfortable in terms of how they work. They work a lot like 12-step groups, if you've ever shown up to those. The difference is it's not an AA type group. There's no overcoming an addiction component to it. Instead, you're basically all there to overcome the struggles that you face, being on a registry, having a loved one on the registry. It's mostly for family members and persons on the registry. And we have a number of people who also they have loved ones still inside. So a fair number of people find out about these support groups, and then they show up, looking for support, then finding out, like trying to help their loved one when they get out, basically, or just somebody to talk to. So we launched it a few years back, calling it Fearless. And the structure of a typical meeting, again, might sound familiar. There's a little bit of a kind of an opening ceremony, kind of establish the rules, and we have a Fearless manifesto, which I could read to you, which we do like instead of the little, what's the one that they do in AA all the time with to change the things you can that way.
The serenity prayer, the wisdom to change the things like
totally blank. We have a manifesto instead, and if we've got a little time, maybe I could share that with you. But the Nebraska group came up with it, so we do that to kind of just establish the mood, and then there's two other components. It's kind of broken in half. There's a sharing component, of course, where people can share, what's going on in their life. It can be about the registry. It can be about, whether your kid got managed to get their driver's license last month. So it could be related or not related. Oftentimes somebody's, got an issue they want to talk about. And then there's always also a component where there's a particular topic. There may be a guest speaker, depends on the size of the group and how many guests they can locate to talk about a particular topic, and then some discussion on that. So it doesn't turn into 2 hours worth of bitching, which tends to be a real downer. The focus is supposed to be on overcoming. So we focus on I messaging. So if you are in a group, one of the things that we learn to do, the habit that we learn to do is, if somebody, says, God, I'm just really struggling with coping with my PO, they've just been, really, they're just, I don't know how to handle them. There shouldn't be anybody that comes back and says, well, you should do blah, 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 blah. Instead, they might say, yeah, my PO, or I have the same PO, but my PO was similar, and here's what I did. Or I know somebody else who, so it's I messages, here's what I did. And the advantage to that is that the person can take it or not. They don't feel like it's being pushed on them, and they can just absorb what they want to absorb. At least they feel listened to. And that's the way, the way we try to structure the meetings and run the meetings. They last 2 hours. We try to keep them strictly to 2 hours. And as Mary Sue pointed out many years ago, while that part is wonderful, a lot of the real connecting happens, quote unquote, in the parking lot. So after the meeting, there's usually a couple people that'll go and hang out. We do have a lot of groups these days, with COVID going on, that went from in-person to virtual. So there are a few groups that have been meeting virtually, and there's some pros and cons to that. When you're in person, of course, you may get that one hug that you get all month, and of course, people like to share cookies and things like that too. But you don't get any of that when you're virtual. But it has also opened the door to people who, for whatever reason, they don't have transportation, or they, the one group that's in their state is, 100 miles away, they're not going to be able to get to a group. And so it has opened the door to more people. We have several groups that are virtual now with random people from pretty far away sometimes. And I hope that will be expanding over time, regardless of whether some of the groups go back to in person, because, even at this point, we still have a lot of places that don't have a group, and you may not know how to get one going. So come to a virtual one, and you can chat about things in a friendly environment. That you can't overstate how freeing it is to be in a room full of people, even if you're not talking about that issue, you're just in a room full of people who all get it. That everybody knows that either you've got an offense in your background or your loved one has an offense in your background. You're not sitting there worrying about the ball dropping or so you can, it's very freeing, and people really appreciate having that chance to talk. Again, even if you're just talking about baseball, you're just in the room having that conversation.
Yeah, there's a bit of that going on in the chat right now. It seems that, just kind of meeting in the chat is the parking lot of the webinar right now. So, I mean, that's how it happens. So
well, we don't allow people to chat during the meeting.
Right.
Wait till after.
That's slight difference, right?
Yeah.
So for a group that is trying to get started somewhere else, what would you say are the ingredients to create one? Because I would believe that you've run into, it's not so simple as 3 people that are impacted by the same issue meeting and start talking. It's more structure probably, and some guidelines kind of maybe.
Yeah, I would say that the key ingredients for getting a group started is, I do think that having that core of 3 or 4 people who all say, let's get together regularly and commit to doing so makes a big difference. If you are meeting in person, obviously having a location that you can have set aside. Some people meet in one of the members' homes, at least up until the group gets too big for that, or they might meet in a church basement or some other location. So but finding that spot, and then the other one that's probably the biggest hurdle in some ways is the getting the word out. You can do that with word of mouth if you've got a few people, especially if you've got people attending mandatory group. You can go you can go to the mandatory group therapy people. So I don't know, your particular state if you've got that. But then the word of mouth, you can say, hey, look, here's one over here that nobody's going to be reporting because we don't allow state people to show up in these meetings.
Yeah.
So that's one way to do it. If there is an affiliate or some other advocacy organization in the state, perhaps they can help promote it to get the word out. Some folks have tried literally looking through the registry in their particular area and sending out letters. NARSOL will help with that sometimes. But again, just having that core that'll commit that we're going to get together, and if it's only us 3 or 4, that's fine. We may not spend 2 hours talking, but we'll at least do an hour and check in with each other and report on it and encourage more people to show up. It tends to start small, and then eventually more people will join in.
Yeah. I know we kind of have an apparatus at the community, the organization that I founded, to be able to connect those dots, because people come out all the time and say, what's in this area, what's in that area. And so there's just a remarkable lack of connectivity and information about what's where and where you can get help with what in just even a county, let alone the state. So I try to be intentional and really know what's going on and be able to guide people one way or another. So that would be something that I think at least we have the muscle tissue, to connect people and keep them, with more people coming out that can need that resource. So there's some good, I think, fuel here to get something like that going. And
yeah. The one thing I've watched with some different groups, as a person who's a moderator, the person who's going to facilitate the group and keep it moving, to some extent, you actually have to be careful as the moderator not to come into it saying, I'm going to solve everybody's problems. You know, and you think that would be this wonderful opportunity, but what can happen in that case is that the group doesn't have a chance to gel, and you end up with, you know, people show up and say, fix my problem, and the facilitator says, here's where you go to fix the problem, and then they don't come back, you know, if they get it fixed. Otherwise they say, oh darn, they can't fix my problem, and then they leave. So you miss that opportunity to build a community, which is a word I didn't use and I should have used it earlier. I mean, fearless is about community. It's about family. People who don't have family, or they have family but the family isn't talking to them, or maybe they do have family but they can't talk about that. And so, you know, you're building a community, and so that's an important piece to keep in mind.
Yeah. And something you touched on as well that I think is really important is, and I've always been big on this, is not getting into the woe is me sense. It's very easy to get into that. And then one person says it and you're even further into the woe is me. And by the end of it, you're neck deep in everybody else's stuff, and nobody's moving. And so having that spirit, that theme of, you know, yes, talking about it is important, but there's always got to be a focus on how can we move forward? How can we, you know, collectively get out of where we're at to somewhere else? So I think that's a focus that support groups don't always have. And so locally, I wanted to touch base on, I'm going to put this in the chat, but Expo R is, I think, the one that I know of in the state that's kind of doing good work in the space. One of the individuals that created it, I think the main individual that created it is currently incarcerated for a 30-year-old charge, and there's some political aspects to why it suddenly popped up, you know, so that's not really worth going into. But the point is that it's a very, very worthy thing, and I think a lot of us would love to see it continued and strengthened. And so what Expo R is doing, for anybody that's in Wisconsin, is just going to read off kind of their mission statement, is exposing the power of opposing the registry. It's a campaign that is an arm of Expo, which is a pretty well-known organization in the state, ex-incarcerated people organizing. Expo R was created in 2021 to focus on the issues faced by those on the sexual offender registry. They assist on policy with power players that affect those in the registry, such as influencing the policies and rules that those on the registry face. They are working on a curriculum to answer the question, what would help an individual thrive on the registry? How do we change the use of GPS? The next meeting is March 9th at 3 p.m. on Zoom, and I'm going to put their information to email them in the chat here. But things like that, I think, to kind of, you know, create and strengthen these examples are really important. And this will also be something that I'll put in the email we send out to everybody. But really want to encourage people, if you're listening, wherever you are, in whatever state you're at, whatever county you're at, is to, you know, start doing that, so to kind of foster what Brenda was talking about, the fearless groups, and get a couple people together and just start, you know, helping each other out, and that'll grow over time. But there's an important point you mentioned, Brenda, that I find to be is like the glue for things like this, is there has to be a sense of listening and moving forward, but not trying to change people. You know, it's not an easy thing there, but those are, I think, really important concepts to have when you're trying to run a group that's going to be lasting and people are going to want to feel, you know, connected to and getting value from, even when they're not getting the value they think they came for.
When we start groups, especially at the beginning with a new group, like I say, there's a whole list of what we call courtesies. Some of which may sound familiar, again, if you're in a 12-step group, but, you know, some of the specific things are no preaching to the choir, you know, limiting time. So if somebody does go off on, you know, wants to go off on a rant, again, focus on I, me, not you, you know, so like, and with the preaching to the choir, yeah, you don't get to go on at great length about how the government has screwed us all over and blah, 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 blah. You know, it's true, but you don't get to go on and on about it.
Right.
So you get to, you know, you got to pull back and say, what's going on in your life right now?
Right.
You know,
have some
how
trick for doing that
today. And so that's one of the key roles at the beginning. I know when we first got our group started, we worked on that, you know, and I had to stop people a lot, say, hang on, you know, and they go, well, what can we talk about? but now it's second nature, and and the group has gelled and, you know, looks forward to meeting with each other.
Yeah, awesome. There's just various tricks for that when people start talking and you don't want to just jump in and say shut up. You have to like do soft core ways of doing it. I was in a networking group where their thing is, or somebody keeps going on, they'll start doing this and then get louder and louder with the clap. So that's your slow, respectful way of saying, okay, it's time to go. Thank you so much, Brenda. I greatly appreciate you,
welcome.
joining us for this as well.
I
And
just dropped my email in the
yes,
chat, fearless@narsol.org, bjones@narsol.org. Send it to both of those two. I can send you information. We do have starter packs with all this stuff that, that can get you started, and other group leaders who are happy to help, with questions and such.
yeah. I see there was one question here that I wanted to address. If Adele is still around, I know you had okay, hey, I know your screen was black for a second. Okay, sorry. Yeah, somebody mentioned something that you kind of addressed in the chat, and it's something that I wanted to touch on as well, the language issue. I had a conversation with a friend yesterday about that part, and he felt in the movie Untouchable, they allowed the legislator, the lobbyist, I can't think of his name, Ron Bland or whatever, a book. Okay. So he, with impunity used the term, sex offender and predator and these evil people. The terminology he used throughout the movie was allowed. And part of me thought that was something that pertained to, the fact the language concept in this demographic of just people that are formerly incarcerated in general, not even people that are just, on the registry. But that has kind of been moving over the past 3-4 years, I think, into this realm of people first language. And so at the time that movie was done, I kind of felt like they just really weren't aware of that being a thing, maybe. But at the same time, it does still have an effect for people showing it now. Like we showed it because I think it's probably the most powerful film I've seen for showing how ridiculous and counterintuitive this issue and these laws really are. But we're still promoting that language kind of when we show it, and it's not addressed that these terms just don't address, the reality of what's going on there. And they're very negative. So I was not aware of the fact that Illinois was defining anybody that's on as a sexual predator. So I was just curious if you could kind of comment on that, because you made some comments about it in the chat as well.
Yeah, well, you make a really wonderful and important point, Shannon, which is that when we call people sexual predators or sex offenders, we imply that there is some common bad characteristic that everyone who has committed a sexual offense shares in common. And the truth is that people who have committed sexual offenses, like people who have committed any other kind of criminal offense, can feel great remorse for what they did and be very committed to leading a positive, productive, law-abiding life after having done that. But when we apply these labels to people, we imply that they have some kind of fundamental characteristic that makes them likely to engage in this kind of criminal conduct again, which is very harmful, and it's also inconsistent with what the science shows. So in Illinois, I can't speak to what labels Wisconsin uses because I just don't know. But in Illinois, we have 2 labels. Sex offender is a label we apply to extremely small group of people at this point. That's just basically people who have to register just for 10 years, which is a ever shrinking group in Illinois. And then we apply the label sexual predator to almost everyone else. And it sounds so horrible. It sounds like you have undergone some kind of assessment that has determined you have a very high likelihood of preying on vulnerable people. But legally, that definition just means you've either been convicted of criminal sexual assault without regard to the age of the victim of the criminal sexual assault, or you've been convicted of any offense involving a minor, including looking at illegal images of a minor. And once you have one offense for any of those types of convictions, you're called a sexual predator forever.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
It's horrible.
Yeah. And then you could probably parse the laws of most any state in the country the way we approach, crime, and there'd be absurdities and just things that have unintended consequences in a way that are pretty obvious, actually, if you think about it. But, for those that are just trying to punish, they don't think anything of it. I think the last thing I want to mention is that in that area as well, you kind of touched on it with, there are just so many different levels of crimes that are categorized as a sexual offense that even in the realm where somebody could logically be thought of as a sexual predator, maybe they've, time and time again, over and over again, just using the term, I think sex offender in itself can be something that an individual using, they start to buy into that. They start to think of themselves as that. It just has like this very subtle deleterious effect on themselves. And so, but at the same time, you can't tell a person, don't call yourself that. It's just a very interesting area with the language of how you want to really promote people to use different ways that they, refer to this group. But then in group, I think we kind of still use those same terms. And I always wonder, is that really not a big deal, or is that actually really hurting, in group, mentalities and self-esteem? So it's just something, and I don't expect you to answer that. It's just very much a difficult thing.
I will tell you that we avoid it as much as possible, definitely in groups. We'll use PFR is the going thing around in my circle, person forced to register. If you don't like that, I mean, just simply registrant beats that. Person on the registry, registered person, anything that gets away from it. And you'd be amazed how many times you could actually just forget referring to the label at all and call somebody a dad. I mean,
Right, yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And you forget that. And
Yeah.
So, we're fairly sensitive to it at NARSOL, and definitely in Fearless. We really work hard to say, find another way to say that. You don't have to use that word.
Yeah, it can be uncomfortable sometimes to kind of face that you've said something that's like a faux pas, but that's the point. It's fine. It's completely fine to
but since you're
be
applying it to
uncomfortable.
yourself, it's usually pretty liberating to say, you don't have to refer to yourself that way. Oh.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, Don.
Words and names can hurt. That's what I've got to say for this language. Got to find something new. Words hurt.
Simple as that. Well, I think with that, I believe that we, are at our final point here. I really appreciate everybody joining us. The next one will be within maybe 2 weeks or so, and it's going to be focused entirely on housing and employment. And we're going to have somebody from the DOC in Wisconsin that works with people that are on the registry, so that we'll get some official answers from that realm about what's going on and, how to navigate things. There are some people that I've met in the DOC for sure that are trying to help. They're not like a representative of this monolith that is the DOC. They really are trying to, create resources and better avenues for things. And with the language, you'd be surprised. Some of them are very, very much with the language change. They're also going to have some people who employ, who could talk about hiring individuals that are on the registry, why they do it, why other people should. A landlord talking about why they rent to individuals that are on the registry and why other people should. And a realtor who will be joining us to talk about her struggles with getting, housing for people, even just buying a house, so just more information about those. And that will be the area that will wrap up this 3-part series for, the issue. And it'll all be recorded. And if you ever want to use it or get any answers going forward or share it or ask us anything, in the future, please do. My information is in the chat. And
there will be there already, because they're asking for it again.
Oh yes, I can do that. It was up top.
Oh, at the very top. Oh
yeah, well, not the way top, but it was kind of close to it. It's been a happening spot here in the chat, so a lot of things have moved along. So just including my time before we go. But yeah, no, thank you everybody for tuning in, and please as well, also any feedback or any ways that we could have done this better, let me know. And you have a good night.
Thank you.
All.
Thank you.
Bye.